Tonight on Ukraine Today, New Year attack. The occupiers hit Odesa with several waves of attack drones and struck the Feldman Eco Park near Kharkiv with a guided aerial bomb. Exposing Russian lies. How did President Trump react to the Kremlin's made-up story about an alleged strike on Putin's residence? A grim forecast. How do the Economist experts assess the chances for peace in 2026? Spiderweb and more effective and high-impact Ukrainian special operations carried out in 2025. All this and more right now. Hello, my name is Volodymyr Robchun and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe and hit the like button. Thank you, and let's move on to the news. Happy New Year! Sadly, in Ukraine it began under Russian attacks, but we are now 1 year closer to victory. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the nation with his New Year message. Among other things, he spoke about the peace process.
The peace agreement is 90% ready. There are 10% left. And this is much more than just numbers. These are the 10% where, in fact, everything is decided. These are the 10% that will determine the fate of peace, the fate of Ukraine and Europe, and how people will live. 10% to save millions of lives. 10% of determination that is needed for peace to work at 100%. 10% of the unity and wisdom we so badly need. Ukrainian, American, European, and of the whole world. 10% to peace.
The Russians have their own idea of a proper start to the new year. Overnight, they attacked Odesa with several waves of attack drones. Residential buildings and infrastructure facilities were damaged. In addition, the occupiers struck the Feldman Eco Park near Kharkiv with a guided aerial bomb. Birds were killed, lions were wounded, a 40-year-old woman was injured. Only 4 days of 2025 passed without Russian attacks. That means that during 361 days last year, launches of Russian missiles and drones were recorded. Of course, some politicians may see 4 days of silence as proof of the Kremlin's so-called peaceful intentions. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drones sent New Year greetings to the Ilyinsky oil refinery in Russia's Krasnodar region. The facility supplies fuel to the Russian army, which makes it an absolutely legitimate target. Do you remember how many legitimate targets were hit in 2025? Just recall the sensational special operation Spiderweb. And there were others as well. More on that next.
41 Russian strategic aviation aircraft and nearly $7 billion in losses. That's the result of the special operation Web, carried out by the Security Service of Ukraine in 2025. On June 1st, 2025, the SBU attacked Russian aviation with drones in the Irkutsk, Murmansk, Ivanovo and Ryazan regions. The operation was prepared over a year and a half. 1,500 drones were used.
Web is a unique multi-stage operation that includes a number of extremely important components. First and foremost is the logistics, that is, delivering the means themselves into enemy territory, in our case 150 combat FPV drones. This includes the delivery of containers inside which the equipment was transported to airfields. It involves agent work, communications and much more. If we look at Web as a whole, we see a comprehensive approach, both agent-based and technical.
The SBU studied the international experience of drug cartels to conceal FPV drones from customs and border authorities. A covert logistics company was established in Chelyabinsk. Ukrainian agents purchased 5 cargo trucks and hired drivers transported various goods to establish the cover operation. The result exceeded all expectations.
An outstanding operation with outstanding results. A devastating blow was dealt to Russian aviation, the Russian armed forces, and specifically to the strategic component, the military transport long-range aviation.
The operation was not without Russian carelessness. The Web operation had to be postponed for a month because the Russian drivers went on a drinking binge during the Easter celebrations.
We had planned to do it before May 9th, but they started drinking heavily for Easter and abused alcohol. Then came May 1st, they had their own property and they spent a week lying around, then May 9th.
The Special Operation Web was successful thanks to a unique combination of human intelligence and technical components. And it was a real slap in the face to Putin and his special services.
Even if just a few of those planes had been destroyed or damaged, the losses would have been enormous. And it's obvious, of course, no matter how you look at it, that this was a colossal failure for both the Russian military and security forces.
In 2025, the SBU also dealt a serious blow to the Crimean Bridge. This was already the third attack on Putin's pride since the start of the full-scale invasion. This time on June 3rd, the SBU struck the key supports using 1,100 kilograms of explosives. Twice.
God loves a trinity, and the SBU always sees its plans through to the end and never repeats itself. Previously, we hit the Crimean Bridge twice in 2022 and 2023. Today, we continue this tradition, this time underwater. For the third strike on the bridge, we used 1,100 kilograms of explosives plus another 1,100 kilograms. In other words, twice 1,100 kilograms were used on the key supports of the illegal structure on Ukrainian territory.
In 2022, we drove onto the bridge from land with a truck carrying 21 tons of explosives in TNT equivalent. In 2023, we approached by water with 2 SBU combat drones, Sea Baby. The third time, in June 2025, a new strike was carried out underwater. And each time, the Russian services were powerless to do anything about it.
Underwater mining, the detonation of the support, and its damage are a huge success for the security service of Ukraine. From an operational standpoint, at the very least from an operational standpoint. The fact is, the protection of the Crimean Bridge, from every perspective, from every direction, is a top priority for the Russian security services.
In December, SBU drones successfully disabled yet another Russian submarine of Project 636, known as Varshavyanka, which was specifically based in the crucial port of Novorossiysk. This is the second Russian submarine neutralized by Ukraine. However, underwater drones participated in this for the first time. The explosion caused critical damage to the submarine, effectively removing it from combat service. On board this vessel were 4 powerful Kalibr cruise missile launchers, which the Russian forces had extensively used to strike various targets within Ukraine. Its estimated total value is approximately $400 million, making it a significant asset.
This is a fantastic operation by the Ukrainian Special Services and the Ukrainian Navy, both in terms of quality and audacity. Because just think about it for a moment, an autonomous underwater drone is a sophisticated device that is extremely challenging and remarkably difficult to control remotely, especially when operating over a significant distance of several hundred kilometers or even more from its operator. They penetrate into the Semes Bay, where Novorossiysk is located, along with the Novorossiysk port and a number of strategically important oil and oil loading terminals. This must be, well, probably in fact, along with Sevastopol, the most heavily fortified and guarded facility on the entire Russian Black Sea coast.
In addition to these unique special operations by the SBU, in 2025, long-range strikes on oil refineries deep in the rear of the Russian Federation reduced oil exports by more than 30% and also limited the capabilities of the enemy's shadow fleet. Also, equipment belonging to the aggressor was destroyed both at the front and deep in the rear, amounting to losses worth many billions of dollars. This systematic work reduces the aggressor's military potential every single day. In 2026, the occupiers can expect even more precise and devastating strikes, the SBU stated.
The war in Ukraine will continue, and reaching a peace agreement in 2026 is unlikely. This is the forecast by The Economist. Its experts suggest that US President Donald Trump may fully shift responsibility for supporting Ukraine onto Europe, and Europe in turn may not be able to handle that burden. How things will actually unfold, we'll see. The year 2026 has already begun, and much depends on several factors: the situation on the battlefield and diplomatic efforts. Moreover, diplomacy largely depends on what is happening at the front line. More details on the hottest directions in the report.
In 2025, Russia did not achieve any of the military objectives it set at the beginning of the year. This sensational statement was made by the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, in his new interview. In the same interview, the general also spoke about the prospects for the coming year. So, the most discussed events on the front in recent months have been the battles for Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. And while in the first case the Russians managed to achieve something, in Kupiansk they suffered a complete failure. The same goes for their more global objectives for 2025. The occupation of Donbass and further advances.
The plans were grand, but we can now state that they did not come true. All of them were thwarted. And we have seen several times how the Russian leadership announced once again that they had captured Kupiansk, captured Pokrovsk, captured more than 300 settlements, which does not correspond to reality at all.
Analysts explain that the goal of capturing settlements is no longer even on the agenda. Now Putin's machine is focused on total lies and propaganda around these cities.
Such propaganda is based on certain textbooks that explain how it should be done. This is well known at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Issues of information warfare and information sabotage are studied in the early courses there. And here is the goal, the ultimate goal. It's not to convince people of falsehoods, but to sow doubt. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to make money off of this. Especially not with our partners in Europe, and especially not in the United States.
At the same time, one of the most important achievements of the Ukrainian armed forces over the past year has been the multiple increase in losses for the Russian army. Since the end of summer, no matter how hard they try, they have not been able to increase the number of troops at the front. As a result, all the reserves they gather are used to make up for their losses.
Hooray! The enemy planned to form 14 new divisions this year. They managed to form only 7. 2 of the Marine divisions consist of just a single regiment, that's all. So the other 7 haven't been formed. The deadlines have been pushed to next year because they were forced to take the personnel from these divisions and use them to fill out combat units. So this is exactly the confirmation that they really do have problems with personnel and staffing.
However, despite this situation, it seems the bunker dweller still has no intention of ending the war. A recent meeting of the Russian Ministry of Defense served as further proof of that.
During the entire 2 hours of this rather significant meeting, neither in Vladimir Putin's extensive speech nor in Belousov's address was the crucial word peace mentioned even a single time. However, the very specific phrase, Ukraine's capitulation, was indeed mentioned, I believe, at least twice, unless I somehow completely missed something important. So it is quite clear that Putin is actively preparing for a prolonged war. Putin is preparing to continue the war. Putin is confident that his generals will be able to handle this task.
Ukraine is also preparing for the continuation of the war in 2026, says Syrsky. This time, taking into account all previous miscalculations, the result was a new line of defense in Donbass, which at this point completely rules out a breakthrough of the Ukrainian front.
Based on experience, this was already my demand. We looked at it well. In fact, these anti-tank ditches make it impossible for vehicles to cross, especially under conditions of drone dominance. That is, as soon as engineering equipment starts to make passages or level these ditches, it gets destroyed. And when there are 2 or 3 ditches, it becomes an obstacle that no one can overcome.
At the same time, the main strategy for the Ukrainian Armed Forces Command for next year is to see an even greater technologization of the process. Robotic systems should replace people on the battlefield as much as possible, and this decision has been made at the country's leadership level.
Further automation, digitalization, and robotization. In short, of course, the development of missile weapons and missile forces units. Because you know that our missile forces and long-range artillery are showing very good results. And the missile forces, let's say, are a deterrent factor that in the future will prevent any enemy from wanting to encroach on our territory.
Speaking of missiles, how can we not recall the last day of 2025? On the night of December 31st, it was they who delivered one of the heaviest strikes against Russian oil infrastructure. In recent times,
we're talking about a huge oil depot in Rybinsk-Yaroslavl region, which was blown to pieces, as shown by the corresponding footage. And in Tuapse for the first time in 2025. The local oil refinery was hit, which directly pushes its processed oil through the local port. There are also striking images from there, showing a direct hit, right where it was supposed to hit, the very heart of the plant.
According to the GUR, in Tuapse they managed to hit the primary oil processing unit as well as the transport pipelines and the loading equipment of the marine oil terminal. And here is another forecast for Russia for 2026. There will be even less money for war. Next year Putin will have even less.
Over the past 24 hours, Russia lost at least 1,060 occupiers, killed and wounded. That brings total Russian losses since the start of the full-scale invasion to 1,208,970 personnel. In addition, over the last day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 7 Russian tanks, 4 armored combat vehicles, 36 artillery systems and dozens of other pieces of enemy military equipment.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Dictator Vladimir Putin decided to sum up the previous 365 days. But since there are no real achievements, either he or someone on his behalf invented stories about major victories, both on the battlefield and beyond. We have a chance to compare these so-called successes of 2024 and 2025.
From taking Kyiv in 3 days to talks about peace and defending Russia itself, Putin's plans shattered to pieces from the very first day of the full-scale invasion.
Russia has always achieved results and has always emerged victorious from the most difficult trials. But
all of that turned out to be empty words. In 4 years of full-scale war against Ukraine, Russia has not achieved any significant success on the front lines.
The year 2025 can be described as a complete failure of Putin's policy towards Ukraine. We are talking about the plans of the Russian Federation, primarily its political and military leadership, about establishing full control over the territory of Luhansk and Donetsk regions. At the moment, as of December 31st, 2025, we can state that, according to various estimates, between 25 and 27% of the territory of Donetsk region remains under the control of Ukraine's defense forces.
The occupiers were unable to turn the tide of hostilities last year. Throughout the entire year, Russia captured less than 1% of Ukraine's territory. Despite the Kremlin's loud statements about a strategic offensive, Russia's actual territorial gains in 2025 remain extremely limited.
The plans of the Russian dictator for 2025. At the moment, the so-called wide buffer zones created on the territory of Ukrainian regions are not included in the territory of the occupying country. The plans of the Russian military and political leadership in Sumy region have completely failed. The maximum depth of the advance is about 15 kilometers. The situation is similar in the Kharkiv region. The plans of the Russian occupiers to create a wide buffer zone from Milov to Kupiansk and Vovchansk inclusive have suffered a crushing military defeat.
In 2025, Putin made 2 bets. The first one, if they keep pushing, then sooner or later, the front will collapse somewhere. Breakthroughs at the operational level. The second bet is that Russian diplomacy will be able to take the United States out of the game. If that happens, then all Western aid will leave together with the US. But not a single one of the dictator's plans has worked.
The United States does not see the Russian Federation as an active player on the international stage. This is evidenced by the statement of American President Trump that Russia should stop being a vassal of China. In other words, the United States is making it clear exactly where the Russian Federation stands on the political stage.
The Kremlin has repeatedly claimed the capture of Pokrovsk, Mirnograd, Kupiansk and Vovchansk. However, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine stated that the reports from the Russian leadership are disinformation and do not reflect the actual situation on the front line.
The loud statements by the Russian side about taking control of Kupiansk, Pokrovsk and Vovchansk were primarily political in nature. This was an element of military political pressure, primarily on the United States and consequently on Ukraine. In other words, to demonstrate the possibility of expanding the theater of military operations if the Ukrainian side refuses to comply with the Russian dictate, specifically regarding territorial concessions in the Donetsk region.
Since the second half of 2025, Ukraine began systematically striking at Russia's oil and gas sector, and also targeting strategically important Russian facilities not only in the Black Sea, but also in the the Caspian and Mediterranean seas. In particular, Sea-Bay underwater drones without the involvement of Ukraine's security service blew up a Varshavyanka-class submarine in Novorossiysk. Aerial drones struck 3 oil platforms in the Caspian Sea.
Ukrainian special services, especially the SBU, performed exceptionally well. This includes the legendary Special Operation Web, which led to the partial destruction of Russian strategic aviation, a series of successful strikes on oil refineries and, more broadly, on oil infrastructure, and the beginning of attacks on tankers of the Shadow Fleet. All of this is having a very real impact on Russia's ability to sell oil and petroleum products. The fuel crisis in Russia.
The year 2025 became the year when diplomacy gained momentum. Almost from the very start of Trump's second term, negotiations of various levels about peace in Ukraine have been ongoing. The first meeting between Zelensky and Trump ended in a major scandal. It was only after a visit to the Vatican that relations improved. Meanwhile, Trump's special envoy met with Putin, after which the American leader personally discussed ways to end the war with Putin in Alaska. But it was to no avail. On November 20th, the US presented a peace plan consisting of 28 points. As a result, this plan was shortened and rejected by the Russian dictators.
The entire year unfolded in the context of very complex diplomatic games in which Ukraine participated. In other words, Ukraine's task was to show that, in reality, Putin does not want any peace, no matter what he tells the Americans. And to a certain extent, this was successful. That is, despite the fact that Trump was indeed very positively inclined toward Putin, phenomenally positive, in fact. Indeed, Trump constantly talks about wanting to have good relations with Putin. He met with him in Alaska, rolled out the red carpet for him, but full mutual understanding between them never materialized. But
despite public statements about progress in the key issues of peaceful settlement, the situation remains unchanged. Ukraine has clearly stated its position. Now the ball is in America's court. How ready is the US to convey this position to Russia and force it to respond? Putin is not interested in peace, and this is confirmed by the fact that the bunker dweller ordered his troops to carry out the objectives of the so-called special military operation in 2026 and also signed a decree on year-round conscription.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now's the time to subscribe, like this video and share it so more people can see it. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine. Do you remember the Kremlin fairy tale about an alleged attempt to strike Putin's residence in Valdai? Of course you do. It's a very recent story. Well, something unexpected happened. US President Donald Trump reposted an article by the New York Post on his social media platform Truth Social, stating that the Kremlin's fabricated story about the alleged strike shows that Russia itself is blocking peace. I hesitate to call this a New Year awakening or just a random post. If it is an awakening, will Trump limit himself to words, or will there be concrete actions against Russia? If it was accidental, then why was it not deleted? Intriguing. We are watching closely. It is also worth assuming that Trump's repost is directly linked to a publication by the Wall Street Journal. According to the report, US national security officials concluded that Ukraine did not attack Putin or any of his residences during a recent drone strikes. It seems something did not go according to plan for the Russians. Finland has detained a vessel suspected of involvement in damage to a communication cable between Helsinki and Tallinn. Preliminary reports say the ship departed from a Russian port. Finally, about the source of funding for Russia's war against Ukraine, more precisely about the situation on the Russian oil and gas market. The issue is that China and India are refusing to buy Russian energy resources without discounts. Here are the consequences this is already causing.
Russia has started selling oil at a loss due to record discounts for China and India. Companies are massively refusing Russian oil because of sanctions. And in order not to shut down production, they have to agree to any terms.
What policy did Russia adopt, realizing that now India is saying it will refuse, and to keep China from leaving as well? They say, let us give you discounts. So yes, this is an option that works, but at the same time I want to emphasize that when you offer discounts, you need to remember the cost of production.
In November, the US imposed sanctions on Russian oil and its price plummeted. even despite statements from Russian officials claiming that this was impossible.
Let's imagine that tomorrow everything is shut down, our gas, our oil, and so on. But the global economy wouldn't survive such a shutdown. Prices would just skyrocket, and that's it. But people would still buy. It's simply impossible without it.
These are large-scale sanctions against oil. We're talking about two of the largest oil companies, some of the biggest in the world. They are heavily involved in oil extraction, and hopefully this will push Putin to become more reasonable.
The price even drops to $36, $37 per barrel. In other words, this is an extremely unpleasant situation for Russia for the simple reason that the production cost of Russian oil is estimated to be in the range of $45 to $50 per barrel. When you trade below that figure, you're selling at a loss.
After that, India announced that they could easily get by without Russian oil.
India diversified its sources of supply, and we went from about 27 countries from which we bought oil to about 40 countries now. But moreover, if the question arises whether to buy from source 1 or source 2, we have made it clear from the very beginning that we will buy wherever we need to.
And although Xi Jinping has promised to continue buying oil, Chinese companies are also in no hurry to violate sanctions.
Despite the turbulence in the international environment, China and Russia will remain committed to the spirit of eternal good neighborliness, comprehensive strategic interaction, and mutually beneficial cooperation.
The Russian dictator continues to lie, claiming the situation is stable and is doing everything possible to funnel budget money to oil companies to save them from bankruptcy.
And our oil will be restricted. Well, at least they'll try to restrict it somehow, although they won't succeed. It's simply impossible in practice at this point in time. I don't think this will have any significant impact on us. I mean, there have already been hundreds, thousands of sanctions imposed, and we are where we are. As I already mentioned, last year our economy grew by 4.3%.
Russia is now selling oil at a significant loss on the global market in the hope that the overall situation will improve in due course. But if this hope doesn't come true, then next year we might be surprised to hear about the bankruptcy of oil companies in Russia.
It turns out that budget money in Russia is going to the war, to saving the sanctioned assets of Putin's inner circle from bankruptcy, but not to making the lives of ordinary citizens more prosperous and secure.